The modern world doesn't acknowledge, but in our time, many yearn to break free of a prison of flat secular materialism. Wait, wrong podcast. But if you aren't already listening to Lord of Spirits, you definitely should be. The modern health paradigm is just as beholden, though, to materialism. We're constantly bombarded with wellness trends, diet fads, and self-optimization strategies, but very few consider health through the lens of Orthodox Christianity. This podcast is here to change that. We'll dive into topics like fasting, prayer, stress, nutrition, and even physical training, all while staying rooted in the timeless wisdom of the Church.
Each episode will break down key health topics from an Orthodox perspective, bringing in guests, whether they're priests, health professionals, or experts in traditional wisdom, to help us navigate the practical and spiritual aspects of true well-being.
Welcome to Orthodox Health, the podcast where we explore the intersection of Orthodox Christianity, physical health, mental well-being, and spiritual growth. I'm Dr. Michael Christian, joined by my co-host John, and we're excited to take this journey with you. So grab a cup of coffee, lots of cream, coconut for fasting, and let's get started.
Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
Welcome back to the Orthodox Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Christian.
And I'm John, your co-host. Glad to be here with you as always. And Mike, although we had to take a bit of a U-turn, we have officially made it to the finale of our Women's Health Arc.
Absolutely. And what a journey it's been. We started with Catherine Phillips on Orthodox womanhood. Then we had Wynn Hoffmaster sharing her powerful story of new motherhood and conversion. Then we sat down with Presbytera Marina Thornburg, bringing the pastoral and health coaching idea. And then, of course, Brennan and Casey jumped in for a bonus episode with a deep dive into PCOS and real-life family stories. So if you've been listening along, you know that we've covered a lot of ground.
And today, we're not just wrapping it up, we're pulling back the curtain on the bigger picture. Because behind all those day-to-day health struggles and decisions, there are deeper forces at work shaping how women think about their bodies, their diets, and even their roles in the family.
Exactly. And to help us tackle that, we are joined by someone who's been at the front lines exposing these connections. Rachel Wilson is here today with us, and she is a speaker, researcher, and Orthodox Christian, and the author of Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation.
Yeah, hey, nice to be here with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Rachel is going to be helping us trace back how feminism twisted food, diet culture, and how the occult slipped in through wellness and health movements. And most importantly, how Orthodoxy gives us a way to both heal and reclaim those spaces.
Absolutely. So let's dive in. So, Rachel, we have a standing rule with all of our guests when we first have you on is what exactly brought you to Orthodoxy and what, if anything, from a health domain was part of that? I know for myself and John, I've told this story a couple of times now, but I basically switched my thesis topic midway through to Orthodox asceticism because I was so enamored by it and just started diving deep on that. So the medicinal framework of our theology was a big driver for me. So if there's anything health related, throw that in as well.
Yeah, sure. So for me, this kind of all started right around the time of 2020 when we had all kinds of crazy health stuff happening in the world. You guys might remember. And I was raised Protestant. So I was raised in a very strict Calvinist household when I was really young, where my dad was a deacon. And he came from a long line of Dutch Reformed Protestants, right? It was very prominent in the area. I'm in West Michigan. We have Calvin College. It's very heavily strict, old school Reformed. And my parents got divorced when I was like 9 years old. It wasn't my dad's choice. My mom had an affair and left. And they kicked my dad out of the church because you can't be divorced. And they were like, well, you can't be a deacon. They didn't kick him completely out of the church, but they said, you cannot be on consistory. You can't be an elder in the church if you're divorced. And he was like, well, I didn't want to be divorced. She left. I couldn't do anything about it. And my mom had some Marxist feminist leanings, but she got really into like feminist literature and stuff and really went off the deep end with that. And that kind of inspired this whole like having an affair with a much younger man and destroying the family. And it really devastated my dad. And the fact that the church he was in did not back him up at all, but instead kind of threw him under the bus, really put a bad taste in his mouth. So he kind of went through a long agnostic phase where and he tried a few like evangelical feel-good self-help churches because he was kind of depressed, and he kind of did what everyone does. You go for about 6 months until you realize there's not really much there. You feel really good at first, and then it just, that praise Jesus, worship music stuff kind of wears off. And then he just became a little nihilistic again for a while. And he's come back to Christianity in his older years. Unfortunately, he has dementia now, and I couldn't convince him of Orthodoxy before that happened. And at this point, there's not a whole lot I can do. So that's sad. But it was really like growing up with this that made me search, because I stayed in the Reformed church that we were in, went to youth group all through my teens, which I will say was good and kept me out of a lot of trouble. I could have easily ended up with a worse friend group and stuff in high school, but youth group was like my main social outlet. So it was good for me. It kept me on a good track throughout school, even though I had terrible chaos at home. My sister kind of went down a different route because she didn't go and she didn't have that. She didn't have those good influences. So when I moved out and was an adult on my own, I didn't know what church I should be in. I kind of thought what a lot of Protestants think. All I really need is me and my Bible, right? I can just pray every night and read my Bible, and that's good enough. I kind of avoided the question of, must I go to church? Which church is the right one? Which one should I go to? I kind of avoided it because this Protestant mindset gave me a good excuse. So I avoided this until probably like my mid 30s, when now I've got kids and Andrew and I are married, and I'm teaching the kids as I'm raising them about God and reading the Bible to them. And they've got a lot of questions, as kids do. And I could kind of answer some of them, but there were certain things from my Protestant worldview that when I tried to answer their clever kid questions, I was kind of at a loss. I didn't have good answers for certain things, especially coming from a more Calvinist background. You try to answer tough questions and you suddenly find yourself in hot water trying to explain away things that are very incoherent. So I thought, okay, I should probably figure this out. I think of myself as a person who is into history and stuff like that. So the first thing I did was go to a church nearby my house just to check it out. And it was kind of a traditional, it was a Bible church, but they were more conservative. So I thought, well, that's good, right? At least we don't have rainbow flags hanging or a female pastor. So this is pretty good. And I liked the people there. And one night after they closed the churches in 2020 and everybody was stuck at home, I said a prayer that changed my life forever. And I asked God to show me the proper way to worship and what church I should go to.
Mhm.
I had no idea what I was asking, right? But I found out really quickly, because it was within like a few days of praying this prayer that a friend of mine sent me some Jay Dyer stuff, right? He's like, I know you like debates. I think you'll like this guy. I know that you're trying to figure out churches and stuff. Just give this a listen. So I'm doing my nails like a girl, and I'm listening to Jay Dyer debate a Protestant. And as he's going through and breaking down the guy's whole entire Protestant worldview,
Mhm.
I'm saying swear words to myself kind of under my breath, because I'm realizing I don't know anything about church history. Why don't I know anything about the faith prior to the Protestant Reformation? Don't know a thing about it. And here I am, somebody who's a history buff, and I know nothing, and a lifelong Christian, and I know nothing. And he's just doing a great job of refuting a lot of my Protestant worldview. And Andy can hear me in the other room. He's like, what are you in there muffling swear words about? Because I'm just going, shit. And I said, nothing, just my whole entire world is crumbling around my ears. No big deal, right? So I thought, okay, I've got to learn this. So I start digging into church history. I start reading everything I can find. I start listening to some Orthodox material. To be honest, I didn't really investigate Roman Catholicism super deeply. Coming from a Protestant background, we already know they're bad. But I did give it a fair shot as far as like what happened with the schism and what happened with the papacy and looking into some of that. But of course, the more I learn, the more I'm like, I gotta tell Andy about this Orthodox church. And I went to him and I was like, why have we never heard of this?
Mhm.
And he's like, I don't know. No, he was just as befuddled as me. And we were like, how do we call ourselves Christians for 40 years and we don't know this stuff? We don't know these basics. Like, what did they do for the first few centuries when everybody didn't have a Bible? What did people do prior to the claims of Vatican I? How was the church run? What happened there? Like all these very basic things that we had no idea. And I told him, it's like there's a veil. It's almost like there's an intentional veil of secrecy over this in the West. Because if you go to Protestants, they don't want you to talk about the Roman Catholic Church. They don't want you to talk about Mary. The church I grew up in was like, don't even talk about her. She's just a normal person. She's nobody special. We mention her on Christmas and that's it. And we both were just like, wow, okay, this is a huge hole that we don't understand any of this stuff. So we both started reading and listening and learning and asking questions. And then we took that first step of visiting some churches and talking to clergy and asking all the questions there. And the first liturgy we went to, I remember standing there and Andrew looks over at me and he kind of just gives me this nod like, this is the good stuff. Yeah, this is the one. Because he struggled too with Protestant churches because the worship music, it tends to be a huge part of the service. It's very feminized. It's kind of new agey in a lot of them. There's a lot of the hands up in the air and everybody's having all these intense feelings and everything. And he's a very intellectual guy and that he just could not get past that. It was tough for him, which I did understand because I liked the sermons better and I didn't want another sports ball analogy sermon.
Mm-hmm.
In Protestant churches growing up, how many sports ball analogies am I going to get every Sunday about how life is really like a football game and the Bible is like the playbook?
Life is just a game of inches.
Yeah, just kind of cringe, to be honest. So when we went to an Orthodox church and we found like this is something that the apostles would recognize if they walked in here today. This is how early Christians worshipped. This is 2,000 years of preserved tradition, which is very amazing. And then, of course, the theology, all those problems I had answering my kids' questions and problems I had evangelizing and talking to other people who didn't believe, it was like this gave me a completely comprehensive worldview, a comprehensive theology that answered all my questions, made sense of all the things that never made sense to me. And I was like, this is it. So it wasn't directly health related, but it was somewhat health related in that it took a pandemic shutting down all the Western church options for me to really go looking in a meaningful enough way to find the Orthodox church, which, like I said, it felt hidden to me. And that's one of the reasons I do talk about it, even though anytime I have somebody on my channel to talk about theology, I have a man with a blessing to teach. I'm never teaching on my own or preaching or anything like that. I just kind of share my story and my experience with people because I feel like it's almost this hidden secret in the West. And it's probably one of the great blessings of my life to find the church. So,
Amen. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here, too. We have the exact same thing. Despite being men, we're still laity. And so for us, it was a big thing that we got a blessing from our spiritual fathers. That was the first thing we did before we even embarked on this. But that was it. Like, there's so much about what we learn, and how it's medicinal. And so for us, it was like, hey, we have this like expertise in health-related stuff, nutrition and lifestyle. And John is a trainer. And so we both have some expertise in some areas there. And so we bring people in. But the idea is the reverse, not just the sports ball analogy for the church, but the church is that sports ball. Same way St. Paul refers to running the race or to wrestling. And so he uses different analogies there. It's like, yeah, all of that out there, all that health related stuff comes back to the church too. But your answer is perfect. I mean, the fact that it was the dark years brought you to the church, that's awesome.
I think it was about the same timing for me. I know Dr. Mike here was nudging me for quite a while, but it was really during that time that the sort of cascade occurred. And it was also Mr. Dyer that pulled back the curtain for me from a Roman Catholic perspective. So I grew up a Roman Catholic. So he's done more than enough phenomenal refutation of the Roman Catholic system. And I heard it and it was undeniable. It's like, he's right. It was one of those things where your mind got it, but you were still in it in your heart. So you're like, and you just have to listen to the same thing like 1,000 times to get your noose corrected. You know that this is incoherent. Just accept it.
Yeah, it was a lot less hard for me than I think it is for most people. I do understand when people have misgivings or they have a hard time because prior to this, I had already a lot of controversial positions that in the long run turned out to be right. For instance, I started homeschooling my kids because of the CDC pokey stabby schedule. I don't know if you guys put this on YouTube, so just in case I'll be a little safe. The CDC childhood recommendation schedule that most kids need for public school, I was extremely skeptical of because I looked at things like the hepatitis vaccine and I went, why is my infant child who is in a rural small town area with no drug addicts, no high risk behavior around, nothing that would expose them to hepatitis, yet carries a certain risk profile? Like the threat of hepatitis to them versus the potential risk profile of the preventative recommendations for that didn't make sense to me. The math didn't math to me, and they made me go to a county health department person, and they put you through a whole counseling session to try to get you to agree to this. And by the end of it, I had that person convinced that I was actually correct. The health
Praise God.
department rep, because I just started asking them a bunch of questions, which is weirdly, it's kind of what I do online now with the debates and everything, just walking through the logic of things, looking at the reasoning behind why we're doing what we're doing. Didn't make sense to me. And the fact that they're so pushy, and they even kind of gave me some not so veiled legal threats as well. I was like, not doing this, not doing it. That was the initial reason, along with the fact that as a public school kid, I didn't feel public school did much at all for me. I was in gifted programs, but I didn't feel like I was learning much. I figured out in about first grade that public school is not for making you smarter. It's not for teaching you how to think. It's for getting you to follow rules and sit still and do what you're told to do. And the whole learning thing is just a sidebar. So I early on wanted to homeschool. Nobody around me supported it. I had my first daughter at 20. Nobody around me supported it. So I was kind of used to going against the grain in a lot of ways by just using what I really felt was correct. And when I found Orthodoxy, it was just like I said, all the parts of Protestantism that never made sense. Like, I knew I believed in God. I knew that Christ was my savior, but I couldn't make sense of the theology, and I couldn't make sense of, like, Calvinism comes with so many rules, crazy rules. It's very Judaizing in a way, because we had silly things like we couldn't swim in our pool on Sunday, but we could dangle our feet in it. We could cook Sunday dinner, but you had to prepare most of it the night before because putting the stuff in the oven was fine, but chopping the vegetables wasn't. Just crazy stuff like this, right?
That is wild.
Everyone's watching each other and policing each other to make sure that nobody's working on Sunday. And just, I knew a lot of family members who would be outwardly really against alcohol, but secretly drinking it when no one was watching. So it was almost freeing for me when I found Orthodoxy, and all of these things made sense, and the phronema made sense, and it made the world and the purpose of life make sense. I just went straight for it. I didn't have to do a lot of working through letting go of my Protestant misgivings. I just kind of was like, this is it. It all makes sense. And I just went full bore. I think Andrew had a little more. He took his time because he was like, this is important, and I don't want to rush, and I don't want to jump into it. I want to make sure I do my due diligence before committing to something like this, because it seems like a big deal. So we had a 3-year-long catechism, which now in retrospect, I'm really grateful for. And we have a wonderful spiritual father, and we had a couple of other priests that kind of helped us along the way too. And I think they were very wise in knowing that if we're public figures talking, they wanted us to take our time. They wanted us to really know what we're getting into and really learn some things and practice and demonstrate some things before jumping into baptism and chrismation. So for anybody out there who's inquiring, or you're a catechumen and you're frustrated because you feel like you want into the church now, don't rush it. Take your time. Just listen to what your spiritual father says, because it's ultimately going to be beneficial to you to just take your time and not rush it.
So there's a lot of things that you said that I want to touch on. I'm going to say first, though, it seems like there's definitely going to be a market for some Calvinist entrepreneur to come out with like a kosher electronics, like the way that the Jewish people have the little tea kettles and refrigerators and all the things that do this stuff for them on the Sabbath. Yeah.
Crock pots. Crock pots. We rely heavily on crock pots.
Awesome. Okay, so that's one. Two, in terms of the hep jabby, yeah, we ran into the same kind of idea. And my joke on that, though, is it's sexually transmitted and or intravenous drug use. Like, my kid's not going to be hanging out with Hunter Biden on the first day of his life, so I think we'll be all right.
Exactly.
So to that, though, to add the actual more serious stuff, in terms of your story, I had very much a similar kind of idea, both upbringing where it wasn't the Calvinist, but I had a non-denominational Bible alone kind of idea, whereas I had a lot of ideas, a lot of questions, but they weren't ever really answered. John, on the other hand, came from a Roman Catholic background, so his was a lot harder
Totally.
of, well, I already have a high liturgy, and I don't know. And
Yeah,
then my
I
dad
think
was a
that's
naturopath,
tougher. Yeah.
and I got into the ancestral health movement before it was long popular. And then I got into microbiome health long before it was popular. And so all of those
Me
things,
too.
by the time I
Me
made it
too.
there, by the time I made it there,
Yeah, we'll have to chat about that a little bit, just because one of our daughters was diagnosed with autism at 2.5, and they told me she was never going to do anything. They said she was never probably going to develop beyond being 3 or 4 years old mentally, that we'd better make long-term care plans in case something happened to us, because she could never probably live on her own or do anything. And I just didn't accept that. I'd already had enough dealings with mainstream medicine to know never to listen to them. I separated my pelvic joint during one of my births, and I had a doctor tell me, oh, you'll never lift weights again. You should just get a walker. And I know that they say these things because of liability, right? That's the main reason. They don't want to tell me go back to deadlifting or squatting because they don't want me to hurt myself and then they're on the hook for it. So I didn't listen to that either. Definitely got back to squatting and deadlifting stronger after that than I was before that. Wasn't a problem. So like when they told me this about her, I didn't believe it. So I went looking for answers. I met Robb, who's an OG paleo ancestral medicine kind of guy. Still a friend of mine to this day. Great dude. Not an Orthodox guy, but he's a great dude. Also, Chris Masterjohn found his stuff way back in the day, who is an Orthodox Christian. He has some really great work too. And we did a bunch of dietary interventions with our daughter. And within a couple of weeks, she started talking. She started making eye contact. She was like a whole new kid, right?
Wow.
And now she's almost 16. She's pretty much done with high school. She's doing great with all that stuff. Super smart, huge vocabulary. You would never know that she had these issues when she was little. All that's really left is like a couple of quirky little things that she has that don't really interrupt her life much or give her any problems. And a lot of it too was homeschooling her. She always says we tried a little bit of the public school special ed stuff for autism. It just didn't fit her. She was doing so good already that it almost was more harm than good. She loves doing homeschool. She loves being self-directed and doing her own stuff. She likes to have the control over her environment and what she's doing, and it's really allowed her to thrive and do great. And she's very aware of her own nutrition and diet now and what foods kind of make her feel good and like she can think clearly and what things really don't. She exercises. She goes to the gym with me. That's part of the Wilson family homeschool is you go to the gym with mom and you learn to exercise and take care of yourself. And we learn basic nutrition, all the things that public school doesn't really teach you. We don't do the FDA food pyramid, right? We don't do, I don't tell them to do Zumba because they're girls or to do yoga. Maybe we can talk about that. I tell them that you have to think about in your younger years, your fertility and supporting that. And as you get older like me and you're heading towards menopause like I am, then you're thinking about maintaining muscle mass and bone density and your blood sugar and all that sort of stuff going into your older years because my parents didn't do that. They've been very chronically ill. My dad's got everything. Like I mentioned, he does have dementia. He's only 70 years old and he's in full nursing care now with diabetes, heart disease, dementia, all kinds of problems. And it's because he just did the standard American diet. He did the typical treatments where they just give you more insulin and then they give you more insulin and then they give you some more insulin. It just destroyed his health. So watching that, I didn't want that for myself. I didn't want that for them. And so I think that should be part of school and raising your kids. It seems so foundational to me to teach them how to support their own health and age well and head into their fertile years ready to have kids if that's what they want to do, which of course I'm hoping that's what they want to do. So far, so good with that. But yeah, that's kind of the background of how I got into that stuff was I was having health problems after going through a really stressful divorce that just kind of wiped out my immune system. I ended up in the hospital. They didn't really know what was wrong with me. They were like, you have the blood work of an AIDS patient. They were like, have you done any risky behavior? I was like, there's been no behavior whatsoever. That's why I'm going through a divorce. Long story short, not something I wanted. It was something I had no choice in as well. A lot of internet rumors about that, but we don't care. Anyway, I had to totally start building my health back because I had 3 kids. I'm by myself. So I had to really learn nutrition. I had to learn to manage stress. I had to learn to get sleep. I had to learn to fit in exercise in the middle of a really busy life because I was like, I don't ever want to be that sick ever again. So that's kind of how I started with it. So then when my daughter had these issues, I kind of already knew sort of where to look, in a way. And I think that conventional medicine's great and it certainly has its place. There's certain things that it's great at doing, but just general wellness and long-term health, chronic health. Our medical system's great if you get a gunshot and you go to the ER, they're good at that. Everything else, they're going to write you a prescription for antibiotics or a painkiller or a statin 99% of the time. And if we're talking about women, what are they going to prescribe almost every woman at some point in her lifetime?
Birth control.
Birth control. Yeah. And I was kind of spared that because I tried it when I was young and it gave me horrible migraines, like absolutely horrific migraines, couldn't even tolerate it, which turned out to be something of a blessing, honestly, because almost all of my friends who were long-term on birth control, whether it be the shot or the pill, have had some type of problem with it. And Jamie Hanshaw and I did a whole episode on this because they do not tell women the risks. They act like it's a vitamin. Oh, you have acne? Try some birth control. Oh, you have heavy periods? Have some birth control. You don't have enough periods? Have some birth control then. You have PCOS, you have cysts, have some birth control. It's the cure-all for everything. You would think that it's an essential vitamin for women the way they prescribe it. I think it's like 88% of all American women will be on the pill at some point in their life.
Lord have mercy.
Yeah. And my book does have a whole chapter on that subject, on who made the pill, who funded creating the pill, why they wanted to do that. And basically it's for social engineering purposes. It came out of eugenics programs that were funded by the Rockefeller family, and Margaret Sanger and a lot of Nazi scientists are the ones who developed the birth control pill and wanted to make it like a standard treatment for everybody because they wanted depopulation. They wanted eugenics. So I think that it would be great if more women knew like the risks in the background and why they might not want to just jump on a birth control pill for any little thing.
Absolutely. And once again, there's so many different areas I want to go with that. So back in the day, were you on Facebook on the IPMG page, the International Paleo Movement Group?
Yes.
So we definitely crossed paths back in the day then. Because I was at
Probably.
the original Paleo FX and the AHSs.
Yes.
Yeah, I was at all
Yep,
those.
me too. I went to the one in Toronto in 2011, and I think I started reading paleo stuff in like 2010.
Yeah, I was in Boston, Austin, Atlanta. Yeah, I was in quite a few of those there. Yeah, so we definitely crossed paths before. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
And I actually, so it's Robb that got me into that. And so his original book was published by Victory Ball Publishing, and they were doing
Yes.
MMA instructionals at that point. And I had that entire collection.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I was just getting towards my MMA career. I was doing Japanese jiu-jitsu and was moving over to Brazilian and Muay Thai and etc. And so all those books were just awesome. And then one day there's this paleo solution book, and I was always interested in nutrition. And there's like, oh, this guy's biochemist. So I did biochemistry in my undergrad, and he's does jiu-jitsu and kickboxing. Sweet, like this guy sounds like my guy.
Yeah.
And read the book, and then like a month later, I was like, all right, this I'm all in. Ended up meeting him up in New Paltz, upstate New York, and waited until after the entire talk was over to like kind of like snag him as he was walking out. And he was expecting another health related question. I was like, hey, what's it like training with, I can't remember who it was he was training with at the time. I was like, hey, what's it? Was not expecting that question at the end. And at the time, I outranked him. He was still only a white belt. I was a blue belt at that point, and he got his black belt before me.
I bet he liked that question, because if you get Rob talking about BJJ, he gets pretty passionate about that. He's probably likes that more than talking about macronutrients for the 5 millionth time.
Yeah, you could see it visibly. Like he lit up. But besides the fact that he like thought he was about to get dragged into a long conversation about more nutrition, like I just talked about this for the last 2 hours. Like, come on, man. Yeah, no, he like lit up. He was pumped. But to that, you talk about the yoga, and that is a running story on ours. We have a standing rule. We established it pretty early on that any priest we have on, that's a question that's going to ask is, can yoga be Christianified? And so far, it's unanimously been no. Some of it's been, that's an oxymoron. That's my priest said that. And John's, I think you've been on with Father Jonathan Ivanov. Right. So John's priest is actually Father Jonathan, the Transfigured Life. And his answer was no, 9 yet. It just every language just kept going. So that was his answer. And then we had Father Zachariah Lynch, and he was the most diplomatic. He was, I just don't see the purpose. He was very nice about it.
Yeah.
But it was still a definitive no.
That's something else I cover in my book, that yoga was kind of a Trojan horse that was snuck in by theosophists and occultists. They wanted to bring it to the Western world as a way to kind of sneak Eastern mysticism and Hinduism and Buddhism and all these things into Western culture and try to synthesize it with Western religions and promote it as like a health craze type of a thing. And when I meet women or talk to women who love yoga, I'm like, there's a million other ways you can do mobility work and stretching and calisthenics type of stuff without doing religious yoga poses that were originally developed and intended to open you up to spirits, to be part of their worship. You don't have to do that. You can get all the same benefits that you like of the physical part of it without any of that. So if they're not sure about it and they're like, oh yeah, but I'm not actually practicing this Hindu mysticism, Maybe not, but there's a lot of unintentional sneaky stuff, especially if you're going to certain types of yoga studios where the person leading it is into that stuff. My friend Jake Rattlesnake, which by the way, I'm wearing his shirt today.
Nice.
He's an MMA boxing guy, and he's been in Bali a lot training, and he went to some kind of yogi stuff and had some really crazy, scary experiences with it that kind of pushed him towards orthodoxy, actually. I don't know if he's officially a catechumen yet, but I think so. He's told me some crazy horror stories, and he's like, I'm not a person who believes in that, and neither was my friend, and this crazy stuff happened because we were doing yoga in a Buddhist temple, and this is what happened, and he's telling me about it. If you ladies out there want to know why I would think it's a bad idea, get my book, Occult Feminism, because I talk about Helena Blavatsky and a lot of the UN spiritual stuff where they wanted to take yoga and Eastern mysticism and kind of sneak it in under the radar. And they knew it was very appealing to women. It was a good call on their part to know that, oh, we can tell women this will give you long, lean muscles, which, by the way, isn't a thing and doesn't exist. If you have muscle, you have muscle. Yoga doesn't do anything special to make your muscles longer or leaner. That's just not true. It was a very sneaky way to get women into this sort of stuff and open them up to New Age religion and ecumenism. So if you want all the details, that is fleshed out pretty well in the book.
Yeah, I can definitely co-sign on that. Having read her book, it's awesome. And so we've actually done an episode on anthroposophy and like terrain theory. And so we did a little bit on both Steiner and then went back to Blavatsky and how his ideas came about. And we also had a yoga specific episode, and we went into Eastern martial arts as well. So we hit that a bunch. And then, like I said, my thesis, so I examined fasting, both from secular and Orthodox perspective, along with Ramadan fasting, but I also looked at yoga, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and transcendental meditation versus hesychasm, versus our prayer life. And so that was a big focus of what I did for my thesis. And to that point, we ran into a whole bunch of mess with the director of my department, because it turned out he was a militant vegan atheist, and
Goodness.
it was cool at first. Like, he wrote me one of my letters of recommendation for the program. It was his program. He wrote me a letter of recommendation and then decided, oh no, I don't like this anymore when I changed to Orthodoxy. But to that, what ended up actually getting my thesis finally through was I reached out to FDA and used his modal syllogisms as a distraction. The
Nice.
logical proofs of the transcendental argument for God. I incorporated that into my thesis and used his actual figures and included that there. And that got me through, finally. But the whole thing was, no, yoga and all these other worldviews, they're all completely worthless and they are incoherent. And if we're going to embark on a scientific project, yes, we might be able to be the bee and pick out some empirical evidence of, oh, well, this breathing technique does benefit us here. This stretch, it may be beneficial here. But if we adopt that whole worldview, like you said before about the different types of studios, Susan on the strip mall corner probably isn't going to be that much of a problem. But it's the ones who dive deeper and deeper and get into the actual theology of it, the actual demonic, if we're going to be honest with it, that's where it starts to get real swirly.
I'm going to try and reel it back. I have a bunch of places I want to go as well. So we touched on homeschool a little bit, and a lot of the things you're talking about in terms of taking your daughters to the gym with you, teaching them about physical health and nutrition and understanding these different phases of life that they're going to be in and how to prepare for them. It sort of ticked off a bunch of these things I wanted to discuss. I have highlighted here that the sort of feminist idea of liberation from your own biology.
Yeah.
So you touched on that beautifully. And just like I said, preparing your daughters that, look, these are different phases of your life. We're going to have to prepare for them this way. I've heard you say on, I think, whatever podcast a few times, you don't have an eternal hot chick phase. You have to be realistic. But all of that is beautiful. And I actually think one of the first times I'd heard your advocacy for homeschool was, I think, on Tucker.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing that. It's actually something that inspired me to want to do that with my son. So I have a lot to learn. And I would love to see maybe in the future more content being put out for homeschool to encourage people to do it and just to have more of an understanding of how it even works. Because I know in my case, I have no clue what I would even do. My son is still very little, but I'm trying to cobble together ideas and figure out how to do it. And I know a lot of the things that you've talked about have helped. So thank you.
Sure.
Going on from there, you also touched on contraceptives. So that was another item that I wanted to discuss in regards to the liberation from biology is that, again, these natural cycles, but if you take the magic pill, you're just free from these things that are
Yeah.
part of what it means to be a woman. We can flee from them.
Yeah. That's kind of a Gnostic idea, isn't it?
Mhm.
That our biology is inherently bad, it's inherently evil. A lot of early feminist ideas were kind of either Luciferian or Gnostic or whatever different flavor of occult that they were into. But it was always this idea that Creator God is bad. He made us in this awful world where we have these bodies that die. And Christianity is there as this patriarchal oppressor to keep women under control and enslave them and make them into baby factories. It's probably one of the most viral clips of me out there is me on the whatever podcast, and I'm talking to a girl who says she doesn't want to have kids and that her boyfriend's fine with it, which I highly doubt. Because a lot of guys these days will just say whatever. They'll just go along with whatever their girlfriend says because they don't want to deal with it or they want to have sexual access. So they'll just say, yeah, sure, I'm fine with that. So I kind of was questioning her about this. And she's like, well, not everybody wants to be a baby factory like you. And this is something I've heard since I was 20 years old. Now, there's nothing unnatural, weird, bizarre, or wrong with a 20-year-old woman having a child. That is normal. That is natural. Historically, throughout all of our history, that was what everybody did. But when I did that, especially because I grew up in a lot of like gifted kid programs and stuff, I was kind of a smart girl. Everybody expected me to go to college. And even all of my Republican, Christian, conservative friends and women around me, it was an unexpected pregnancy, but it was with my high school boyfriend. And again, this is why I talk about things like libertarianism, Americanism, Protestantism, because I was raised with this worldview of marriage is just a piece of paper. What really matters is if you love each other. You can live with your boyfriend and that's fine. And to be fair to my 20-year-old self, I had a really terrible situation at home. So, and my boyfriend at the time was a very responsible, upstanding guy, very mentally even keel, all that sort of thing, very stable person. So for me, to my 20-year-old self, that certainly seemed like a reasonable idea to get out of this bad, chaotic home situation. My mother was schizophrenic and alcoholic and all these other terrible things. So and my dad even was like, yeah, that seems way better because he was trying to deal with a bunch of stuff with my sister. I couldn't be there. So I didn't have good choices. So I thought, well, this is fine, And even my youth pastor was like, oh, it's fine. You're gonna get married, so it's fine. This is what everybody said to me. So when we accidentally got pregnant, of course, I was thrilled and I was like, well, it's earlier than I planned. Hoped to get married first, but that didn't work out. I didn't even consider abortion, never considered it. And people around me suggested it.
Lord have mercy.
My own mother suggested it. It was, look, your life will be over if you have this baby. And I was like, you're nuts. I thought they were crazy. They thought I was crazy. And my mom wasn't Christian conservative, but other women around me were. And they were like, oh, this is terrible. Rachel's never going to be anything. She's never going to do anything. It's over for her. And they were telling this to my boyfriend too. And he kind of listened to them more than I did and wasn't as happy about it. And long story short, he ended up leaving a couple years down the road. Again, terrible, heartbreaking situation for me. Never expected it, never wanted it. But that's kind of what happens when you get these ideas that you can just live with your boyfriend and it'll be fine. You can just do these things. And like I said, I couldn't take birth control, so it was trying other methods that failed. But nevertheless, I would never take that back. I'm super glad. I would never go back and not have my daughters. I would never go back and change having them. But I mean, everything about that experience from a spiritual health perspective was tough on me because I wanted to be home with them. And everyone around me was, well, you're going to go back to work. You've got to go back to work. That's what we do now. And I remember driving my first daughter to daycare. I've told this story before, but just thinking, I'm going to go to work and pay half of what I'm going to make today so that some other lady who is not my child's mother can raise her while I pretend to care about my haircutting job. This is insane. Why do we all do this and pretend it's normal? And when I would voice this to the women around me, it would just got like, well, you don't want to go back to the days where women are trapped in abusive marriages. And I'm like, it doesn't seem like it's saving them from that. We have just as high domestic violence rates now. In fact, years later, I looked into it and found that actually we have much higher rates of domestic violence in cohabitative relationships than you do in marriages. So if your goal is to avoid spousal abuse, you're much better off getting married to a guy who wants to be married to you than you are living with your boyfriend like I did. Not a good idea. So I found myself in my early 20s in this horrible situation that I was like, how did a smart girl like me end up here? So I had to figure things out the hard way. And a lot of what I'm trying to do is save other women from that. So that's a lot of what my writing's about. That's a lot of why I say these things. Not because I'm perfect and have always done everything right, but because I made well-intentioned mistakes and had bad guidance. And I lived in a culture that said, this is normal. This is what we all do now. Do it like we're doing it. And to the extent that I went along with that, it was detrimental to me and to my kids. All these years later, the reason I'm advocating for the things I do is because I want young women to not be pressured to get on birth control or have abortions because their college career is too important and they don't realize that this is risking their health. Young women today, like you said with the eternally sexy thing, you would not believe the amount of women that I've talked to, specifically on the Whatever podcast, who honestly think they can wait until they're in their 40s to have kids. They don't know that statistically that's very unlikely. Even with IVF, if you do IVF, which we can get into why as Orthodox Christians we would not be wanting women to do IVF, but even if you do that, the success rate of IVF after 40 is like less than 10%. You're still in the single digits of it ever happening, and it's a pretty grim situation, but because we have Jennifer Lopez in her 50s still acting like she's 20 and looking like she's 20 and taking movie roles where she's young and partying and everything. Jane Fonda's out there, she's sexy at 70. These kind of things have got younger women convinced that this is me for my whole life. Everything is what I look like, my sex appeal, the attention I can get from it. And I don't want to be saddled with children and a husband because then that's over for me and I can't be free and liberated and be like Taylor Swift. I'm going to be like Taylor Swift. I'm going to have a huge career. I'm going to be famous. And then I'll wait till I'm in my mid to late 30s to finally settle down and even think about a family. That's the default now. And it has major health implications on a number of fronts because in order to avoid pregnancy into your 30s, you're either going to be chaste, which no one's doing. Nobody's like, I'm going to wait to get married because I want to be chaste until I'm 35. That's not how we do it, right? So everyone gets on birth control. People are having more sex partners than they've ever had in the history of humanity for the most part because it was just societally frowned upon up until very recently. And we have feminism to thank for that. Feminism made the sexual liberation stuff possible. It wouldn't be here without that. And it was this idea that women are just like men, so they can go and like the wealthy elite men go out and spread their seed like the Genghis Khans of the world. And therefore that's appropriate for every woman out there, which is insane. So you have higher rates of STDs among women than we've ever had. Have, for the first time in over 100 years, since we've had antibiotics, the maternal death rate in the United States is going up. And it's due to advanced maternal age in pregnancies. Women are having babies older than ever, and it just leads to more complications. So even aside from all the spiritual damage, the moral and ethical problems, and the religious problems with these things, it actually affects women's health a lot too. Women have higher rates of alcohol disorder use now than men do because they're trying to deal with the stress of trying to have a career and a family and be a boss babe and stay young and hot forever and party all their life. And alcohol doesn't affect women the same as it affects men. But this idea that men and women are the same. Oh, I can go out and party with the boys and I can drink like the boys. Girls go to college and binge drink, and it's like much more detrimental to them than it is to men. So I just think the whole idea of feminism is damaging to women on every front, but we don't usually talk about the health aspects of it. So I'm glad you guys are doing this because I think it's important.
Yeah, no, definitely appreciate you touching on all that because it's definitely things that we've touched on a little bit here, a little bit there, but you really just laid that out so beautifully. So in terms of from an Orthodox perspective, obviously we are called to be man and woman, right? We're supposed to be bound together and to live out that reality within the life of the church. And of course, once you lose that understanding, you open the door for society or the state to redefine what marriage even is.
This is the intention, right? The intention behind marriage. And there's basically two ascetic paths in life. You either go into monastic life or you get married. There's a few exceptions. There's a few other things where maybe you won't do that. But generally, for most of us throughout Orthodox history, it was going to be one of those two things. And for the vast majority of us, it's going to be marriage. And marriage is not a certificate that's granted by the state. My next book talks an awful lot about that because it was actually the Bolsheviks who, if you know anything about the Orthodox Church in Russia and what the Bolsheviks did to the church, their premier feminist propagandist, she was actually a Marxist propagandist, but she was a huge staunch feminist, one of the worst. If you think that Margaret Sanger or some of these Elizabeth Cady Stanton were bad, Alexandra Kollontai in Russia was one of the worst, and I'm going to make her famous because she doesn't get the credit she deserves. She was one of the first women in a prominent world government position after the Bolsheviks took over. She was Lenin's commissar for social welfare. She was the first to make marriage in Russia no longer governed under the church as a sacrament, but just a certificate that was issued by the state, and you could get no-fault divorce in Russia in 1918. Long before we had it here. It took until the 70s and 80s for us to have it in the United States. They were doing this in Russia over 100 years ago. Her idea behind this was, if we want full communism, and she said the church is a major problem for communism. We've got to get rid of this idea of God, and the church is hierarchical and it's patriarchal, and we've got to get rid of it. And the way to do that is to get rid of fathers and husbands, because everyone's interest in having personal property or leaving a legacy to their children is through patrilineal lineage, like having fathers. So she thought, we've got to get to a point where nobody knows who their dad is. I know that sounds crazy, but she wrote extensively. There wasn't YouTube back then, so they wrote. So you can go back and just read on Marxist.org all of her writings, and she was a prolific writer, a big propagandist, and she said, we've got to reorganize society so that we no longer have this one man, one woman marriage stuff. It's holding women back. Women need to stop seeing themselves as mothers. They need to start seeing themselves as units of labor. And we've got to eliminate this idea of fathers and husbands, because really the only allegiance a woman should have should be to Lenin. Lenin's your daddy, right? So we're going to get rid of this church sacrament. We're going to make it just, we issue a certificate if you want it, and you can dissolve it at any time for any reason. So they had no fault divorce. The next thing she did was make abortion not only legal, but paid for in state hospitals up until birth for any reason at all. And this was like a genocide. If you look into the numbers, there were 3 abortions in Russia for every 1 live birth between 1918 and I think 1926. It was only like 8 or 9 years, because as soon as Stalin came to power, he was like, whoa, we're going to be wiped out between the famine and the war and this birth rate problem. He had to make it illegal again.
Wow.
But it was that bad, and she was that good of a propagandist that they had 3 abortions in Russia for every 1 live birth, and they're still one of the highest abortion rates in the world. They've never fully recovered from this problem. So other countries around the world followed suit. It took decades, but one by one, they all adopted this idea as well. That's because they're no longer looking at it, like you were saying, as an ascetic path for salvation where one man joins one woman with God. It's a union with God under the church. It's dying to yourself and learning to care about someone else more than yourself. These are major spiritual pillars of human life, and the communists wanted to completely wipe them out for their ends, for good reasons for them, for what they wanted, for what they had envisioned. It was a great idea. And I'm sad to say that it worked really well, because what do we see now? After Marxism came into American universities in the 70s, when the Rockefellers and the Ford Foundation created gender studies programs, and we created all these scholarships for girls to go to college, we start pushing all the women into college. I know that was me. It was like from the time I entered kindergarten, it was like, you will go to college. And I had a full ride scholarship, and I didn't go, and everybody lost their minds. I was like, I just want to stay home and have babies. And they were like, no, like a fate worse than death. Ah. But that's what we did. And now that's what almost every girl believes. So you do hear people say things to me like, I don't want to be like you. I want to be more than a baby factory. Never mind the fact that all we're really asking, we're not saying women can't do anything else. We're saying this stupid advice of spend all your fertile years in college and developing a career, and then think about babies after your fertility is practically gone, is not only dangerous, unhealthy, stupid and backwards, but it's also pushed upon you by people who want to do social engineering. They want depopulation. They want more people paying taxes. They want children to be raised in state institutions like daycare and public schools so that they can be propagandized with whatever it is that the state wants them propagandized with. Not to get too conspiratorial, but that's exactly how it worked. My book goes into detail on that as well. So what I tell young women, because I understand where we are now, I understand that we live in a two-income economy, which I think is tragic, because for all the women like me who are heartbroken of I either can eat and put my baby in daycare or I can stay home and starve and not be able to pay my bills, it's terrible. We didn't have that. If everybody's out there going, but Rachel, we can't afford it. The reason we can't afford it is because we created a two-income economy when we pushed women into the workforce in huge numbers in the 1970s and 80s. We almost doubled the labor market in about a decade, and wages have never recovered. So I want to make it socially okay and cool and acceptable for women to have families first. And you do it young. And you get married young, right? Just like Father Josiah Trenum would have you do. He talks about this all the time. I love it. Do that. And then your kids are practically grown. I'm 45. My kids are almost grown. My youngest one at home is 13. All the other ones are grown up and moved out. Now I can do things. Now I can write a book in my spare time. Now I can go on a podcast with you guys and talk about the things I've learned in the last 25 years of raising kids and having a family. And there's a lot of life to live after 40. I think we give women backwards bad advice, and a lot of them don't realize it until it's too late. And then the amount of heart-crushing emails and messages that I get from women who are 35, 45, 50, 60 years old. I had one lady email me and say, I'm sitting here reading your book and I'm just crying and there's like tears on the pages because I'm 60 years old and it's too late for me. I can't go back and I can't change all the things I did wrong. I just didn't know. And if I had known, I wouldn't have done it this way. I was just doing what everyone told me smart girls are supposed to do. So that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to help erase this weird stigma that marriage is dangerous. This idea that marriage is dangerous. There's a piece on my Substack where I went through with all the statistics and debunked this lunatic idea that your main threat in your life is getting married and having a husband. Yes, abusive marriages exist. Yes, some men are bad. But even statistically, even now, after 100 years of feminism, the statistically safest place for a woman and for children is with the married biological father of your kids. Every other living situation is statistically far more risky for all types of abuse, physical, sexual, emotional, financial, any type of abuse you want to think of. You're better off with a man who wants to marry you, especially in a church. If it's a church man and you're getting married and there's some pastoral oversight, you're far better off. So, yeah, I know I talk a lot, so rein it back in if you guys want
No,
to.
you're good. So actually, I know a lot of people get really spooked. It's the Western Halloween season, and the word conspiracy, and they get very spooked and scared by that. Yet, as Christians, we really need to have an idea of who's behind that, whether or not it's instantiated in people in back rooms rubbing their hands together. It's still the enemy who is behind all of these ideologies and movements, like Father Spirit and Bailey's Orthodoxy and the Kingdom of Satan, or the original Father Seraphim Rose's Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, or his Orthodox Survival Course, or any of that stuff. All of those ideas, you can trace it back. And I mean, that was definitely a major part of how I landed here in Orthodoxy as well. Was reading nihilism was the final nail in the coffin, because I had 10,000 words written of a book that I'm never going to publish, because I read nihilism, was like, oh, this is 1,000 times better than anything I'll ever write, so I don't need to do this one anymore. But to that point, you were talking about the confusion of paternity in the communist world, and that's very similar to things we're seeing today when we take the evolutionary idea so far. So it's another one that came out of that same wheelhouse of ideas. And there was a book, Sex at Dawn, by Christopher Ryan. Back when I was still in the ancestral health, the paleo type world, pretty sure he was on Rogan at the time. That's how I first heard about it. But his whole thing was an evolutionary psychologist, and him and his partner were all about how, oh, we need to be like the bonobos. Chimps, they're too boring and they kill each other because of mate selection, whereas bonobos are polyamorous and there's confusion about paternity. And so they're just fun loving and they have no problems. And that's what we need to do. And that's an idea of what happens when we eliminate the Christian phronema for how we live in the world. And so that idea tied back to, a little bit of our ancestral talk before.
I'm just thinking about how it is such a tragedy, like you were saying, about how we live. It's sort of necessitated this two-income family situation. And I know from personal experience, it breaks my wife's heart that it has to be that way. And I'm trying what I
Yeah,
can to try and alleviate some of that. But we live in New York, and it's just
that's rough.
the deck is stacked. So,
Yeah,
we're all just
totally.
trying to do what we can in the same vein that you mentioned to try and shift the culture. You mentioned Father
Yeah.
Josiah Trenum, and I know he's having the marriage conference, which I'm sure is going to be phenomenal. And it's just another step in, like you said, shifting the cultural perspective on marriage and family life and when to be preparing and taking those steps for marriage and having children. And it definitely can't be in the way that it's been done over the last 50 years. It has to change.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's something that it's so controversial to talk about because the propaganda is so strong
Hmm.
that when I come out and say these things, at first people think, well, this lady's a nutcase. She's absolutely crazy. But if you can listen to me make my case for just a few minutes, I'm pretty good at persuading women away from it. There's been multiple panels that I've talked to on whatever where I've laid out this case and asked them, like, how does this make sense? How does it make sense to tell you girls to spend your teens and 20s being promiscuous, riding the carousel, as they say, and then taking all your fertile years to try to be a career woman? And then a lot of them have this thing where you hit like 32 to 35, and it's like, oh crap, the biological clock is real. And they kind of scramble to find a guy to marry because they're like, oh, my other friends are having kids, or maybe I'm just feeling like this career stuff isn't. This happens to a lot of women too. They think, oh, I'm going to be a career girl. It's going to be so awesome. They've watched every season of Sex in the City, right? And they're like, this is what I want to do. And then they get into the real world and they're like, wait, this is like long hours and getting up early and not having a life and having to hustle and compete with men in the workplace. And what they find out is biologically, that's not very advantageous to women. We are not just smaller men. Men don't have a 28-day cycle. Men have a 24-hour cycle. You guys have testosterone. You don't have these big ebbs and flows in your other hormones that make you more sleepy sometimes, more emotional sometimes, more hungry sometimes. It's weird because the atheist feminists are usually Darwinists
Yep.
and they're biological determinists
Yep.
and they're atheists. And when I bring up this reality, they completely reject it and they just act like, no, my cycle doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect me. I can be a CEO just like a man. I can be a trial lawyer. I can be a surgeon. It's fine. I'm fine. And it's like, no, you're not, right? Suddenly they deny biology when I bring up the fact that, yeah, your cycle affects you. And this is another thing that I have 4 daughters. And when they all went through that, I would talk to them about it because I wanted them to understand if you feel like you're going crazy for 2 days every month and then suddenly you get your period and you're kind of okay again, that's normal. And if
Mm-hmm.
you know that about yourself, you can plan for that. You can be like, oh, it's about that time. So if I'm feeling like everything makes me cry or every little thing my husband does makes me want to hit him with a hammer, it's probably just my hormones and I can take a nap today. I can look at my nutrition or whatever things might help you with it and just wait a couple days and you're all right again. Nobody said any of this to me. Nobody ever taught me any of this. I was expected to just be productive and act like a guy. You can do everything a man can do, and you should be in school, and you should be achieving more, and you should be working harder. And I am kind of that personality type where I took that to heart. And so I did a lot of stupid stuff. Even when I started weightlifting, I was like, I'm just going to lift like a man, which, look, I'm a big proponent of strength training for women, which in the trad sphere is also controversial. People tell me women shouldn't do that. It's not very feminine. And it's like, okay, well, I don't want to fall and break a hip when I'm 60 and not be able to get up off the
Hmm.
floor. Being weak isn't cool. I've had 5 babies and I have no long-term problems from it because I have a strong pelvic floor. These are things that people don't want to talk about, but pelvic floor strength, having some muscle, having good cardiovascular endurance, all these things help with pregnancy too. And they help with being a mom and they help with having a bunch of kids and keeping up with them. So I'm a big proponent of strength training. But again, we have cycles that might affect how we're feeling and how strong we are on certain days. There might be days where we see this with Camila Blanc-Bezenet, who was a CrossFit Games champ. She's come out now and talked about how trying to do that sort of training for so long and trying to fight for those championships drastically affected her fertility. And now she's had to do IVF, and she had a really difficult pregnancy, and she may not be able to have more kids. And it gave her a lot of health problems and a lot of mental problems of feeling like, I should be able to do this. Why can't I perform like a machine and a robot? And she's learned now that she's retired to train differently and kind of honor her biology a little more and work with her body instead of against it. So the whole idea that women are just slightly smaller men, it's just detrimental in so many ways. It sets women up for failure and for disappointment. And I think this is why we see so much alcohol disordered use among women. We see women with a lot of stress-related health problems
Absolutely.
and mental health problems, because they think, I'm just a small man and I should be able to do these things. And there's a reason in Orthodoxy why we have a 40-day period after birth where the woman just kind of gets to stay home with the baby and focus on establishing breastfeeding and recovering from birth. And when I found this out, I was like, this is amazing. This is awesome. We should have this, because
Yes.
I was always expected to go back to work after 2 weeks. It was like, you need to go back to work. You just had a baby 2 weeks ago, but just go to work and be detached from the baby all day. And when I was younger and had my first 3, I had postpartum depression after. And I genuinely believe it's because it was extremely disruptive to my hormones, my circadian rhythm, and my heart and my spirit to be separated from my newborn
Exactly.
like that so fast. So the Orthodox phronema, the Orthodox worldview, the way that things were done in these ancient traditions, it's like they knew what they were doing or something, you know?
The Holy Spirit actually led us in the right direction. Yeah.
Yeah, the idea that babies ruin your body. This is another thing. Margaret Sanger perpetuated this myth. She spread this garbage propaganda that her mother died from overbirth. It was a lie. Her mother had consumption disease. Her
Yep.
mother had tuberculosis and died from that. She lied about everything. But this was another one of her lies. Oh, my mother died from having too many babies. And she wrote all these books saying, oh, having babies destroys your body and you'll die from it. It's bad for you. That's all a lie too. But from the Orthodox way of doing things, the way that we honor women's bodies after birth and pregnancy, and we have the churching of mother and child after 40 days, these are wonderful traditions that have amazing health benefits and psychological benefits. So it's just another thing about Orthodoxy that I love.
Absolutely. And that was great. You're talking about actually being aware of and honoring to your biology. We were talking about that a couple of weeks ago with Presbytera Marina Thornburg. She's very big on the cycle syncing idea in terms of both the nutrition and the training aspects. And so she works with women on that within an Orthodox framework. So actually trying to incorporate the fast,
Yeah.
as long as they're not obviously actively pregnant or nursing. That's going to be different animals because y'all get a little bit of a dispensation on that front, at least a little economia on that. But for women who are trying to actually be mindful of the fast, but also want to still be able to train and fast properly without falling apart during their cycle. And it was an area that John and I were very interested in learning, because I've worked with some fighters, female athletes who are weight cutting, and it's difficult when you're having to consider the cycle, because for me, it's like, oh no, it landed right there, right during fight week. So now we really have to play around with your weight even more. And so I had some experience with it, but not a tremendous amount. So she was definitely a wealth of knowledge there. It was pretty cool to link into.
Yeah. If you go back and look at my Tucker Carlson appearance in 2022, you'll notice that I was a lot more rotund. I was a lot more substantive at that time. I was a little bit chunky and I didn't look very healthy. I look back at that video now and I'm like, wow, I look inflamed. My face, aside from being just heavier, I look inflamed. And it's because I was. Right about that time, I realized like I've gained all this weight. I didn't really know why, didn't have like a super good answer. I was like, I'm getting older. I just need to work harder. So after I saw myself on that video, I was like, I got to do something about this. I am an in shape person. I need to get back in shape. This is not me. And I spent the whole year just thrashing myself into the ground like a dummy, just training 6 days a week while trying to manage a household and do all these other things. And I had like a trainer I even started working because I don't know what's happening. I could always stay in shape before. And finally she was like, look, we got to get your blood work done because something's wrong. And when we did that, we found out my thyroid was trashed. It was like barely functioning. I had no sex hormones. They were all just basement level. I looked like I was menopausal. And I had Hashimoto's, hypothyroid, had autoimmune disease that I didn't know that I had. once we fixed all of that, which took a while, that's not like an overnight fix. I did have to go on like full replacement for all that stuff. But it took a year and a half to kind of get things right. Then, of course, I backed off on my training. I still train really intensely, but I do 4 days a week. I do about half the volume I used to do. I do have to be stricter with nutrition than when I was young, but we kind of all do. But I can still eat a lot of good whole foods and stuff like that. And I've lost 40 pounds. I'm back in shape. I'm doing good. Did get a weird diagnosis just today. So it's weird that we're here talking about
Yeah.
health.
Go
I
on.
found out randomly that I have hemochromatosis, which is a
Really?
genetic like iron storage disorder.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hmm.
So all of a sudden, and I think it's because I'm heading into that phase of life when you don't menstruate anymore, you don't lose blood every month. So suddenly my iron and ferritin were like high, and I'm going to have to donate blood the rest of my life. Nothing I can do about that. I'm going to have to eat less steak, which breaks my heart because I love my red meat. But I'm going to have to back off. But then I thought to myself, actually, the Orthodox fasting calendar could be
Yep.
really helpful
Exactly.
for this because there will be a lot more restriction on that. Because if you let Rachel do it, she's going to eat red meat twice a day, probably. So another bit of wisdom that I'm seeing in the fast, like if you did have this random genetic mutation disorder for storing too much iron, the Orthodox fasting could actually be really helpful for that. So I'll just lean into it, I think, a little bit more than I have in the past. But yeah, I mean, these are just things that women go through. And it was me, once again, thinking I'm a machine and not a woman, and I can just train balls to the wall in my 40s and it's like not going to affect anything. I'm not saying that caused it. I think the autoimmune stuff was just there and I didn't know. But I should have paid attention to like the fact that I'm sore constantly. I'm never not sore. I'm doing way too much.
Mm-hmm.
But even I still have a lot of this programming that says I'm a man, I can do it. The boys are going to hit shoulders for the second time this week. I can do it with them. I grew up around guys. I'm a bit of a tomboy. Sometimes it gets the best of me, but yeah.
So I wonder if you've had that underlying hemochromatosis and that played into your Hashimoto's in terms of having the excess iron, creating some excess reactive oxygen species, free radicals, causing a little bit of inflammation underlying that. So to that point, during the
Probably.
fast, though, you still have to stay the heck away from most greens on that point because, yes, they're going to be non-heme iron, but it's still an iron source. And those are also already trash for your thyroid. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, it's gonna be fun. I'm like, just what I need. This is awesome. But
Yeah.
yeah, we'll figure it out. I'll be a regular blood donor, I guess. So nothing I can do about that.
Orthodox Christians, are you tired of treating fasting like punishment? Ready to stop burning out during the fast while keeping your energy steady, your mind clear, and your prayer alive? I'm Dr. Mike from Orthodox Health. We help believers fast in the way that the church intended, beating fatigue, rebuilding vigor, and aligning their health with their faith without turning into another diet or self-help plan. Also, they can serve their families and God with real strength. We create a custom fasting blueprint that matches your meals, your protein sources, and your training schedule to the church calendar. Also that your metabolism, hormones, gut, and prayer rhythm stay in sync. You'll finally learn how to nourish the body while humbling the flesh, not punishing it. Like my client Mandy, who says no more afternoon crashes. Or Robert, who told me he was still able to train while fasting. And Chris, once exhausted and napping every few hours, now has more energy, deeper sleep, and a stronger rhythm. So book a free Fast Without Burnout plan discovery call today. In just 30 minutes, we'll map out your next 30 days of fasting and recovery around your unique lifestyle. Visit orthodoxhealth.com to schedule. Limited spots available this week. I look forward to serving you.
I wanted to backtrack a little bit just to mention, because
Yeah,
you brought
please
up
do.
sort of the propaganda that tells young women that pregnancy and birth giving just destroys your whole body. And since you mentioned the hypothyroid Hashimoto's, my wife actually has the same thing. And to counter that sort of narrative, it was interesting when she was pregnant with our son. It is amazing and beautiful, the healing relationship that goes on between mother and child during the pregnancy. My son, my wife says this all the time, that he was healing her thyroid. She says when she was pregnant, she hadn't felt good like that in years. She lost a bunch
Yeah,
of
I've heard
weight.
a lot of women say that.
We say that to people and they're like, "What do you mean? You lost weight when you were pregnant?" She's like, "Yeah, my son healed me." Right? It's beautiful. And it's counter to the propaganda that everyone hears that you're gonna, break down and get fat and maybe die. Horrible stories that people tell young women. It's thank you for being encouraging. My goodness.
Yeah, I go on TikTok when Andrew does these TikTok invasions, and
Mm.
sometimes I jump in there and talk to women too. Leftist women are convinced that childbearing destroys your body. I had one of them tell me, she was like, the risk of death is super high. I'm like, how high? Like, what's the percentage that you think? And she was like 50%. She thought that, and I said, think about this for 2 seconds. If 50% of women died in childbirth, do you think there'd still be human beings on the planet?
Hmm.
But they've lost any ability to actually just, it's not even a lot of critical thinking. It's very obvious common sense stuff,
Hmm.
but people are so propagandized. And what I've learned primarily in the last few years of talking to all these people and doing so many debates on so many topics with everyone from around the world is that most people have no idea why they think the things that they think.
Hmm.
They will have the most staunch opinion and the most dug in position on something, and you just ask the simplest questions about why, and they don't know. They've just heard that everyone said that. And so there's been a century of propaganda saying that marriage is prison. Children are a ball and chain. They ruin your life. They ruin your body. The smart girls have careers and they're free and they don't listen to men and they do what they want. They're the boss. And it's such a fiction because, first of all, that's not life for anyone. Men aren't just free to do whatever they want all day, every day, and just living their best life, never listening to anyone, just doing what they want. The propaganda is so bad that I feel sometimes like I'm screaming into the void. Like I'm one tiny person in this ocean of propaganda trying to go, it's not true. But what can I do except keep writing about it and keep trying to correct the record? And it's easy. It's not even hard because this stuff doesn't even make sense if you think about it for more than 5 seconds. But like I said, it's beat into you. It's in children's programming, it's in Disney movies, it's in K through 12 curriculum. I mean, now we don't even say, like Mr. Rogers used to say, if you're born a girl, you stay a girl. And if you're born a boy, you stay a boy. Now we say you can pick, you can just swap. We're just interchangeable Mr. and Mrs. Potato Heads, and we can just switch parts. And that's all we are. That's because that's where it inevitably leads when you dismiss the idea of human beings being image bearers of God. If we are not image bearers of God, then we are just wet meat suits with interchangeable parts, and we can create reality, we can deny biology, or we can tell Christians that they're science deniers while we're denying the science. It's so insane. And that's why you see so much mental illness and stuff like that on the left, is because if the left side, I'm not saying the right wing is perfect, right wing has its problems, but certainly on the left, that's why you see the crazy Antifa people in the streets right now. They're convinced that their normal Christian conservative neighbor is an evil fascist, and they're ready to throw a Molotov cocktail through your window over it. That's how convinced they are from the propaganda of years and years and years of hearing these people are fascists, these people are evil, these people are bad. It's the same thing with feminism. And it's so beat into everyone's heads. It's been so predominant for the last 70 years that even most men I talk to, I've had men come and debate me and be, you're crazy. You're crazy for saying this stuff. And I'm like, but I'm a woman. Are you going to deny my lived experience? And they're like, wait, I can't do that. Shoot, So it's one of the reasons why my priest is amazing. And sometimes I'm like, this is so ugly and awful sometimes. Like just being on the internet can be so rough and so awful. And but you were born by providence in a time and place for you to have figured this stuff out and be good at explaining it to people and breaking it down for people. That's what you're supposed to do. So he's like, I will bless you. I will come to your house. He's so amazing about helping us and keeping us like spiritually strong, because it's not easy. It's not easy when most women hear what I'm saying and think that I am a woman-hating, misogynist, self-hating, awful person who is trying to hurt them or take away their rights. And that's not what I'm trying to do at all. What I'm trying to do is break them free of this spell that they're under that I think is harmful. And I don't tell anyone what they have to do. I just simply go in and go, does this make sense to you? When we break it down like this, when we look at it, is this working for you? Is it working for anyone else? Is this helpful? Look at where we are now. Are things really better? Did feminism do any of the stuff it promised you? Has it made you safer, happier? Has it created this utopian world where it's just peace and love and there's no war? No, none of this has worked out that way. And it turns out that, teaching women that the unborn baby inside of them is a parasite trying to kill them is really bad for women. And that seems like it should be so common sense. But in this day and age, it's not common sense. So Me, and I think there will be a lot of women after me who are going to realize this, because a lot of them are waking up. And my hope is that when I'm dead and gone someday, my book will be sitting in some young lady's library, just like I have my Phyllis Schlafly books, or I have some of my church father quotes about the nature of man and woman and things like that. I hope that they take what I've done and they run with it. And I hope that they do it better than I did it, and that women can go back to what God intended for us, because that's what's going to give us the peace and the safety that we're looking for. It doesn't mean that life's going to work out. It doesn't mean that you won't have bad things happen. That's the nature of living in a fallen world. But to be orthodox and try to squeeze the feminism into it, like some do, there are some women that are trying to do this. I think there are some feminists who join the church specifically for the purpose of trying to subvert it.
Oh, yeah.
I can't assign intent, but it looks that way to me. It looks like there are certain actors who come in with feminist presuppositions and they're like, I'm going to force this in there and I'm going to get rid of this. It's one of the last bastions of the patriarchy and I have to destroy it. And they're destroying the thing that protects them. They're destroying the God that loves them and created them for the purpose of being a woman. You're not a man. You're not the same as a man. You don't have to act like a man and compete with men and think that men are the enemy and all these crazy things. So if you're Orthodox, it really does come down. We've got the Virgin Mary. We've got the Theotokos. She's a virgin. She's a mother. She's a saint. She's the Queen of Heaven.
Amen.
She is all these wonderful things. She is the most highly venerated saint we have, and she's a woman. And she didn't have to be a boss babe. She didn't have to reject motherhood. Imagine when she was given the choice, when the angel came to her and said, this is your choice. And she said, if that's what the Lord wants, I will do this. Imagine if she had been like, no, I'm going to go get an abortion. Well, so how can we as Orthodox women support these kinds of things? We can't. And I think it's incumbent upon us as Orthodox women to fight this kind of stuff with everything that we have. And we have the best example to do that. And it's the Theotokos. She's the answer to this woman question that we have of what should women be like? What should we be striving for? Who is the ultimate example? It's not me. I know people try to say Rachel thinks that she's the moral authority. No, 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 no. I'm not at all. It's not me. Of course, it's her. And if she could be a virgin, we can be virgins. If she could be a mother, we can be mothers. And if she could be like this bastion of strength that she was, but also be soft and gentle and quiet and submissive when it's appropriate as well, we can do those things too. So we have the example we need. We don't need to invent some new icon. We have one.
Absolutely. And to those of you who are out there like, oh, come on, as if the Theotokos, as if the Virgin Mary could have, a Bobo. And to that point, the Didache, which was one of the earliest Christian writings, is actually very explicit that abortifacients, which are usually compounds, they were herbs and stuff that were used back then to induce abobos. And yeah, we explicitly ban those from the earliest days. The writings of the 12 apostles, what the Didache is referred to as, and it's first century. So no.
Not a modern problem.
Exactly. It goes back.
Right.
I mean, if you think about sacrificing your kids to Moloch, everything that goes back even further, right? So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's essentially what it is, right? I want to be the Wicca Witch goddess. I want to be the boss babe. I want to be all of that. And so in order to do that, I have to sacrifice something that should be very valuable to you in order to achieve that. So we've touched on a little bit of that in a couple of different episodes as well, of that sacrificial aspect. And yeah, that really does not get much stronger than in the Abobo question of just, you are literally sacrificing your child for your career.
Right.
Lord have mercy.
Well, it's pretty crazy. I did a stream with David Patrick Harry about this as well. When the Roe v. Wade stuff got overturned, one of the primary ways that people were trying to challenge that overturn was here in the United States, but also like in New Zealand and a bunch of other places in the world where they still have like native pagan religions. And in America, it was a lot of Indian tribes. They said, abobos are a ritual sacrament for our pagan religion. You can't tell us that we can't do this because it's protected under freedom of religion. And I don't know if y'all have been on TikTok, but Andrew says it's like a wasteland. It's like human garbage wasteland. It's the most terrible place on earth, which is why he goes in there and tries to invade it and change people's minds. But on TikTok, You can look under the witch talk hashtag. Witchcraft is super popular. It's super popular among young women. They like all the paganism and the witchcraft, and some of them think it's just crystals and gardening, and I just water my house plants with my menstrual fluid every month because it has nutrients for my plants. It's some weird stuff, but
Huh?
it's seen as being natural and going back to nature, and they love it because it's very feminist. It's not patriarchal. Witchcraft is like the original feminism. So a lot of these younger girls that are kind of more radicalized love this stuff, and there's multiple accounts on there that are teaching young girls how to ritualize their abobos.
I see. Wild.
And this is normal in America in 2025. This is mainstream pop culture TikTok stuff that anyone's 14-year-old girl is probably watching, and you probably don't even know it.
Mhm.
And it's based on these ancient occult and pagan rituals that are making a comeback. It's always the same spirits behind these things. They don't go away. They just reinvent these things for a new age and for a new culture, but it's always, historically, it's the same spirits behind it. So when you say sacrificing your children to Moloch, it literally
Yeah.
is.
Absolutely. And to that last point there, I'm 99% sure it was in your book, but I've definitely at least heard you say on other things, and I brought it up as well, was with the Wicca types. Yes, there is something behind that, but the ones what they're practicing right now was still invented by a guy, by Gerald
Yes.
Gardner there, so it's kind of hilarious that
It was invented by a guy who was into nudism and just wanted to touch butts.
exactly. So it's like, wait, so now you're an empowered female by, right, going to the butt touchy guy. That actually makes a lot of sense in today's world, right? That's always been the discussion of the male feminist, right? The male feminist archetype is just the dude who wants to simp and wants to be able to talk to these girls because he can't actually do it in real life without getting too deep down into the MRA, like red pill smear kind of thing. But that is the archetype of the modern male feminist. So there
Yes,
you go.
it is. There's actually a term for it. It's a little bit of a colorful term. I'll make it a little better. It's a sneaky guy strategy. It's a sneaky guy strategy, right?
Yes.
Make yourself look as non-threatening as possible. Make yourself look, hey, ladies, I'm just here to help. I'm just here because I just love and appreciate women so much. And they wait for the opening and then they make their shot, or whatever. There's all kinds of crazy things out there. And in a country where, this is why I talk about the Protestant founding of the nation in my book too, which is, some people really don't like that. Some people got a little mad at me about that. And I kind of throw a little shade at Rome too, because the radical Protestants are the ones that came here and primarily set up shop. And if you look back at the Second Great Awakening and the Burned Over District, a lot of the stuff that was going on had a lot of occultism and socialism and crazy stuff mixed in, transcendental ideas, a lot of proto-New Age stuff that was going on. And it's because they had rejected church authority and holy tradition. And it was just like, we can make our own cult. And we just throw Jesus's name on there and we just make our own cult. That's what the whole Kellogg's and the Seventh-day Adventists. And you'll notice most of these had like some woman who had a dream or a vision. It's like a really common theme. That's the meat and potatoes of my book, is going over all that stuff and the role of women and feminism and women becoming female pastors. The women's Bible was written by female lesbian pastors and suffragists and stuff like this in 1895. That's another thing, another big takeaway is that this isn't new. Like, feminism's been around since the dawn of time. That's why I go back to like ancient Sumeria to talk about things like goddess worship, and that in pagan religions, there's this huge goddess worship element that we do not have. And I actually wrote like a theological paper that I presented at a theological seminary about that as well. And so the Orthodox worldview is special. There's nothing else like it. There's nothing else that gives you the fullness of the truth. You can't mix these other things in because you always end up in the same place. Whenever you think, well, I can take this and I can take the parts I like and get rid of the parts I don't like and make my own thing and still call myself Christian, it doesn't work. You always see that it ends up in a really bad place. And it usually ends up with like female pastors saying that abobos are actually good and that alternative lifestyles are actually great and Jesus would love that. And you just end up going off the rails. So there's a reason why, Paul is telling Timothy to, adhere to the traditions and even the things that you were taught and heard, not only the things that are written down, because this is what guides us. The church at Pentecost is what guides us. So trying to squeeze feminism in with your orthodoxy is not going to work. Everywhere I see it, I'm going to fight it with everything that I have. And I kind of have to, because when the men do it, they just get charged with being wannabe abusers or misogynists or having some kind of nefarious intent. Oh, you're saying this because you hate women. Oh, you're saying this because you want to control women. So if Rachel says the exact same thing, they at least have to deal with my ideas. They at least have to deal with the argument. They have to contend with the actual argument and not just level accusations at me that I'm some kind of abusive person. It just doesn't work. You know what I mean? It doesn't land. So that's one of the only reasons that I'm out here doing this. Otherwise, I'd be gardening. I'd be just having more chickens and gardening, and I'd be so happy, and I wouldn't have to worry about voting. They.
Nah, that's awesome. And that's exactly why when you were on Honor Club the last time with Buck, why I reached out, because I mean, I'm super familiar with your work. I've been following for years. Like John again mentioned, you know, he started with the Tucker interview there, and both you and Andrew, I'm very familiar. But to that, it was what kind of sparked my mind. I was like, oh, well, we're moving into this women's arc. Then we want to go to that sacred diet arc, and I knew a lot of the stuff we wanted to cover in terms of the Protestant awakening and the revival movement of the 1800s. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, that's like areas I really want to hit, and she's really crushed it. Like I need to get a hold of her. I need to bring her on because she's gonna be the perfect segue here. So no, that's great.
Yeah.
You mentioned the occult stuff. We didn't get too much into that the first time around. We got more into Kellogg's weirdness, his electroshock therapy, and his coffee enemas and all that stuff. The next one, we get into the Mormons and the Methodists and the temperance movement. We're gonna dive a little bit deeper into how that rolled it in together. And so yeah, we have a lot of fun ideas moving forward, and it's not gonna be like a 6-part arc because we're gonna hit the Muslims and the Jews and the halal and kosher dietary laws, and we're gonna go into Zen, so the Buddhists and the Hindus, so we're gonna hit them back again. We're very mean to the yogis around here.
Sorry, yogis.
Yeah, we get them a lot.
I tried to get into it in my 20s and 30s. All my friends wanted me to do yoga, and I just could never get into it. Now I know why. It's because I was always like a little too based to fall for that. You know what I mean? I just give myself credit and act like, nah, I was too cool. I was too cool to fall for the yoga deception. It's actually not true. I love, me and Buck get along because I'm like an old school metalhead, and I love putting on loud music and lifting and going heavy and all that stuff. It's better for me than partying. Everybody else wanted to party and go to the club and drink or whatever, and I just wanted to get in the gym and blast some metal and lift heavy stuff. I don't know. That's what gives me the adrenaline and the feel good chemicals. So I like doing that stuff. It's weird to be in the place we're all in, the three of us, where we're in the very beginning of what I think is going to be this huge Orthodox takeover of America. I think 200 years from now, people will look back and see Jay Dyer and a lot of these you guys and all the people who were writing and podcasting and getting this stuff going, because we've come to the end of this experiment, this Enlightenment, radical Reformation experiment that is America, where we've kind of gotten to the logical conclusion of it. And I'm not saying everything about our founding is bad. Like I'm a rural American, okay? I was born in like a small farm town in the Midwest, and I love the American small town culture. I love my American fellow people and all of that stuff. But I think that the founding ideas, those Enlightenment ideas, the Freemasonry that was mixed in, the radical Reformation stuff that was mixed in, we've kind of seen what happens when you follow through with that to its logical end. We've ended up in a country where half the country thinks the other half is evil. There is no way to reconcile it because we've told everyone that anyone can be an American. We're a melting pot. Anyone can be any religion. You can have any opinion that you want. You can do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else, which once you get into that and try to figure out where that line is, good luck. Well, there's just a lot of things about it that is kind of crazy because it's falling apart. We all know it's falling apart. Nobody knows where we're going to be in 100, 200 years. But almost everybody at this point kind of feels like it's breaking down. We don't know what the American identity is. We don't know who we are as a nation. We don't know where we're supposed to go. And we've got this like crony deep state government, and everyone kind of knows that. Like both sides agree that it's really messed up and it's really bad. We just completely disagree on where we should go or what we should do about it. But the whole idea that we could have, I mean, the founders did want state religions in the states.
Mhm.
There were Presbyterian states and there were Lutheran states and things like this. Even a Catholic one, I think Maryland
Yeah.
was, right?
Yep.
But then we ran crazy with the liberal part of it where we had freedom of religion. And in my book, I talk about how in the 70s, witchcraft was made legal. I mean, we started out as a country that burned witches. And by the 70s, we made witchcraft legal and protected under the freedom of religion clause because it got challenged by a witch in San Francisco who was an immigrant from a communist country. And she said, I moved here to do this, and you can't tell me I can't because your own constitution says I'm allowed to, I have the freedom to do this. So like when you take these ideas to their end conclusion, this is where you end up. And that's why I think orthodoxy is exploding. People are looking for something. They're like, there's got to be some glue to hold this together. There's got to be something we can look to that will last, something that's eternal and ancient and something we can hold on to, because everything else is like shifting sand right now and there's nothing to grab onto. And when people find the Orthodox Church, they're like, this is it. And I know there's people that get nervous about that and they think people are coming to the church for the wrong reason. I don't think that's the case.
Mhm.
I think that it's people waking up and going, yeah, this is something bigger. It's bigger than blue versus red or left versus right or evangelical Zionism or Mormons or whatever. These very American things that just don't work. And people are finding this ancient tradition. You've got the Slavic churches, you've got the Greek churches, you've got the Alexandrian churches, the Antiochian Middle Eastern churches, and everybody can retain their culture and their language and their identity, and yet we're still all Orthodox Christians, and we still have the same morals and ethics and worldview and all of these things. So I think that America's just ripe for orthodoxy right now, and I think that's why it's taking off the way that it is.
Notice the one you didn't name, though, the Amish question. You didn't name the Amish as one of the problems. That's the big one right there.
I should have, because I'm literally surrounded by Amish, like they're all around me.
Well,
So I should have thought of that.
exactly. The Amish supremacists, that's the problem right there. Actually, same here. Down here in Northwest Arkansas, we have lots of Mennonites and lots of Amish. It's funny because you know the difference, because if they have a cell phone and a car, then that's the Mennonites. But if they're still riding their horse and buggy, which Sunday mornings I'm driving to church, it's the funniest thing. I'm watching this thing, like, how does the horse know how to stop at the light? I don't know.
Yeah, in my little town, they will come and park their horses in
Yeah.
town when they come into town to do stuff. So there'll be horses parked along the side of the road or bikes, but
Yep.
a lot of horses and buggies still.
Yeah,
So.
upstate New York, same thing with the Amish. They have their buggies and same thing.
They are ripe, though, for Orthodoxy, too, the Amish.
Uh-huh.
Any of those, like, Anabaptist types, they are, like, ready for it. There's even a channel on YouTube. Popped onto them a while back. I haven't looked into them again since. Like, I think they were Mennonites because they were on the internet, obviously. But either way, they were, like, looking into Orthodoxy, and they were, like, documenting the journey. And I was like, hey, that's kind of cool.
They weren't like ex-Mennonites. They were still in it.
As far as I could tell, yeah, they were still whatever their equivalent of an elder clergy type situation was. Yeah, like elders of the people. They were young-ish, somewhere in our ballpark, like mid-30s, early 40s, something like that. And they were exploring Orthodoxy. And it was like, huh, all right.
That's
Yeah.
kind of cool.
I mean, they understand hard work. And again, it's the weird aspects, like you mentioned, the ones you found in America. But just a little bit of tweaks here and there.
Let's pray for a mass Amish conversion.
That's
Oh
right.
man, who knows, maybe in the next 100 years, if we make it that far, we'll have an Orthodox American imperium.
Absolutely.
So we talked a little bit about how really the feminism does go back all the way to Genesis in a sense. And one of the notes I had down here about Eden was this concept of eating as rebellion and autonomy, that the first act of sin, the fall, was through eating. And maybe we could talk a little bit about that and how that idea manifests in modern movements, because obviously it does manifest at the individual level when it comes to personal sin like gluttony or things like that. But then there's the cultural aspect of that where you've got both ends of the spectrum. There's the push for super thinness and the quote unquote empowerment narratives that come with that. But then there's the flip side empowerment narratives of beautiful at any size.
Yeah.
So if we could talk a little bit about the weirdness that goes on with that.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say the act of eating was the first rebellion. And I think when we think of a rebellious woman now, we think of a woman who's, you can't tell me what to do. I don't need a man. There is that for sure, but it's often more insidious. It's usually a lot sneakier. And I think that's how it happened in the garden, because Eve was promised something. It was your father, God. He doesn't want you to have this. because he doesn't want you to be a god like him. He doesn't want you to have this knowledge and this power. He wants to keep you suppressed under his patriarchal rule. And if you eat this, you're going to gain this knowledge and have those powers and be on par with him. And that's what we tell women. We tell women that your husband, he doesn't really care about you as much as he wants to use you and abuse you and keep you down so he can control you, right? He doesn't want you to have the power that he has. And so we tell women that to be feminist is to be empowered. And that's always what the objection is. Whenever I'm talking to women, it's always this, yeah, but I could have all this and you want me to say no to it. Why would I turn down all this power? Why would I turn down being able to have my own money and have my own stuff and not need anyone? Why do you want me to have to rely on someone? And it's the wrong way to think about it. Most of getting feminism out of your head, most of defeating the ideology is reframing it. Because what the feminist narrative has been really good at is framing everything as abuse. Right? Now, if your husband says, I don't really want you to go to the club with your girlfriends in the super tight short skirt, that is abuse. If the husband says, we shouldn't be spending this much on whatever, we need to be a little more prudent and frugal and we need to save for security reasons, that's financial abuse. Anytime you give a woman a limit, anytime you tell her no, no matter what your intentions are, no matter how good they are, this is now framed as abuse. And the whole feminist thing is framed this way, that there's this power, there's this special thing you could have, and somebody doesn't want you to have it. And you need to tell them to get lost, and you need to go out on your own and do it yourself. And if you knew the history of feminism, it goes a long way to curing this problem, because people get this idea now that all men through all of history have had all this power. Like every man born just does what he wants. He just hits the age of like 12 and he just goes about his day every day doing whatever he wants and nobody can stop him and he's got all the power in the world. The world's his oyster and things are easy for him. And girls are the only ones who are given limits. Women are the only ones who are told no, and it's so incorrect. It's so wrong. Just for an easy example, most people have no idea that men in the West only got the right to vote about a decade to 20 years before women did. They get this presupposition that all men have always been able to vote since we started having democratic societies, and it's completely untrue. Most men were barred from voting for a variety of reasons until right before women got the right to vote. So no, it's always been a small handful of people who had power, and most men throughout all of human history have been treated as disposable, as cannon fodder. Another really easy one is that each of us alive today has twice as many genetic ancestors who are female as we do male, because all you had to do throughout human history to have kids as a woman is be fertile. And someone's going to come along and fertilize you. And as a man, you had to prove yourself worthy of that. You had to be able to support a family. You had to go to someone's father and ask if you could marry his daughter, or you had to win a war bride. If you weren't Christian, you had to conquer and get a war bride. But most men have died in occupations. Men do all the dangerous, life-threatening jobs. And even today, they have far higher rates of dying on the job than women, astronomically higher. Men tend to die from diseases of neglect more often than women, because they're usually kind of left on their own for the most part, whereas women, oh, nobody wants a little old lady to be alone. So that comes with major trade-offs. And then we talk about men dying in war and having to do all the dangerous stuff to protect the women and children throughout all of history. So this idea that like men have always been empowered and we're suppressing the women is just false. It's just false framing. And women didn't really want liberation. The women in the 19th century saw their lives as privileged. They were like, we have a great deal. We can do pretty much what we want. And Christianity is what gave that to them, by the way. Christianity was the original liberator of seeing women as real people, worthy of protection and veneration, and seeing them as worthwhile and valuable, and giving them what we would now call human rights, to the extent that anyone had them. Again, it's not like men just always had human rights and could do everything. It wasn't like that at all. So the way that women in the 19th century saw it, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony both lament this in their epics that they wrote, their biopics that they wrote about leading the feminist movement, that the hardest thing was convincing women that they needed liberation from anything. Susan B. Anthony said, women have such great lives now. They can do anything. They can be educated. They can read. They can have any job. And they could. Women will tell me crazy things like, women weren't allowed to read. I'm like, Not here, not in the Christian West, not in the Christian East, not in Christendom. Women were oftentimes the educators of young children and could read more often than men, because men got sent off to do labor jobs. Women had higher high school graduation rates and higher literacy rates than men, going back as far as we've taken those stats in this country. For the most part, there were certain groups like Black women that may not have, but by and large. So this idea that men have just always had rights and women have never had rights is just false. It's not true. And if we look at the history of it and see that actually it was Christianity that made life better for women and made men the protectors and providers and put all that responsibility on them, the women who opposed suffrage actually said, we don't want liberation. We don't want to have to pay bills and have jobs. Look, we're busy. We're organizing church stuff. We are doing community outreach. We're raising kids. We're taking care of the sick and the elderly. We have our domain. We've got plenty going on. We're happy with that. We don't want to be involved in all the dangerous, dirty, awful aspects of life that men have to deal with. They didn't want to have to do jury duty and hear the gruesome details of crimes. They didn't want to have to be drafted into the military, which people keep trying to do now. Now that we have women in the military, they're trying to put women in the draft. And there are certain countries that already have women in the draft. So these were the things that they were like, no, we can't be the child bearers and raisers if you want us to take on all the responsibilities of men. And certainly we can't have all the whatever privileges there are of being a man if we don't have any of the responsibilities. So what feminism tried to do was give women all of the privileges without any of the responsibilities. And there's a lot of people online who think that Andrew hates women or I hate women or we're just mean to women. Not the case. It's just that when you try to talk to young ladies now, it's very difficult. I don't know if you've seen what the attitudes are like. I don't know if you've seen how their entitlement is, how easily they will say awful things to you, how confident they are in their really ridiculous or totally uninformed opinions. But I always say, in their defense, we shouldn't be surprised. What do you think happens when you raise a whole group of people and from the time they're born, you tell them they're born perfect, they should be loved the way they are. They don't ever need to change. There's no need to repent of anything. You're healthy at any size. You're big and beautiful, or you're skinny and hot, whatever it is. We tell them that this alone, this magic time of their life where they're sexually attractive, is what makes them valuable, and that they don't have to have all these responsibilities, but they should have every privilege. And the men are the ones that are bad and need to change and never them. So should we be surprised that they're kind of entitled and difficult and hard to deal with sometimes? No, it's because we've told them they're goddesses. And the problem I have with this is that from a Christian lens, it literally like breaks any hope of them having salvation, because the thing you need for salvation is humility and repentance. And we literally tell young women that humility is stupid and that there's nothing to repent for because they're perfect the way they are. They are a goddess and everyone should just love them and give them whatever they want as they are because they were born perfect. And they really think that this is self-esteem. They think that this message is loving yourself. That's why you always hear women talk about loving yourself. That's not the Christian message. The Christian message is we love ourselves because Christ loves us. We are good enough because Christ says we're good enough. And that to be Christian and to be saved is to have humility and have repentance. And that's what keeps us from the enemy. That's what protects us from the enemy. It's not there to keep you down and enslave you. It's there for your protection. And we've ripped that away from women. And that's why they love things like the occult and witchcraft, because those belief systems reinforce this idea of self-love and everything being about you and you being the goddess and your God, and everyone else is bad. It's just so inverted. And that's why when people try to cram the feminism into the Orthodox Christianity, you can't do it. They're completely contradictory worldviews because you can't tell women they're perfect how they are and they're a goddess in and of themselves and the world needs to conform to them, and also tell them to be humble and repent and go to confession, or that they need Christ or they need grace. Those things don't fit together.
No, that's wonderful. And that's about where I wanted to start closing that. You touched on it earlier, so it's kind of funny. I'm like, oh man, we're out of order right now for when I mentally projected it of how we do offer that, right? What they're seeking in the feminist idea, we offer, as you said before, in the Theotokos. If you want to understand how a woman should act, how to behave, how to be feminine and female in the world, there's no better example than that. And you really nailed that home before, and you're really sealing it right there. So We've kept it here for almost about 2 hours at this point, but I promised you a bunch of help. And we did, we touched on some of the ancestral stuff before that. We asked Father Zechariah, though, this question, because at that point he was closing in on his 400-pound deadlift, and he was super pumped about that. I think it was the next day after we dropped the episode, he hit it. So we're like, yes, we had a small part in that. And John,
Right.
in case he's listening to this one, you still owe him a kettlebell workout.
I do. I'll put it together. I'll get it over to him. I promise.
I will let him know. I'm going to hold you to it now. Now it's out in the public. We were promising that. But I think that'd be a lighter question then. What is your favorite lift and why?
Oh, that's so hard.
Because I wanted to ask you a question that you probably don't normally get.
It's going to surprise everybody. Probably like a military press or a
Okay.
shoulder press of any kind. Because I have absolutely weird upper body strength for a female. So
Okay.
I'm pretty strong. Last time I checked, I could do a 110-pound military press for 5
Nice.
reps. Not too bad.
Not at all.
I do like 45s or 50s for overhead dumbbells. I just have really strong shoulders. Jim Bob's very jealous. You guys know Made by Jim Bob.
Absolutely.
He's always talking about how he thinks he has small shoulders. I don't know. I think they look normal to me, but I'll give you a little bit of shoulder width if you want it.
I've seen that in DPH's chat. I've seen them ragging on Jim Bob's shoulders there.
I was just going to bring that up. DPH had to keep telling the chat to cool it. Stop making fun of my friend Jim Bob.
See, now, I don't have necessarily weak shoulders, but I have like no shoulder mobility. This is about as high as I can get naturally, and that's when it starts to impinge. So yeah, my overhead game is not too strong.
I lucked out there. I've actually torn each shoulder at various points.
Oh, wow.
Not bad enough that I needed surgery. One of them, they were like, maybe surgery, but I didn't want to do surgery because I know the outcomes are not great. So I'm just going to rehab the heck out of this thing. And from doing the shoulder rehab and doing all the PT for it, now they're super stable and I have really good mobility and they're probably my strongest joints at this point. So then I love anything hamstrings because I have really strong hamstrings. So I've always been a good puller. Deadlifts I was always good at. Squats, I'm kind of weak, to be honest. Like most girls are really good squatters, but I have like really long femurs. So it's a lot of leverage for me to try to, I don't think I ever got past like 200 pounds in a squat. So that's kind of weak for a girl compared to my other list. Bench press, I think I had a 1 rep max of like 170.
Okay.
At one point on a bench press. I haven't benched in years. Like I don't do just a flat bench press anymore these days, but upper body strength, I don't know. I lucked out with that for a woman. So it's kind of fun to show off when you're lifting with the girls. Because I have a girlfriend and both my older daughters lift, but especially child number 2, she's a beast.
Yeah.
She is a beast. That chick got the best genes from both parents, I think, because she just like puts on muscle like nobody's business and she's super strong. It's crazy. But even when I work out with her and we're doing like lat pull downs or something, she's like, and mom's just going to put the pin at 120 pounds because she's a monster and she's just going to make everyone look weak. So it's my flex. So that's probably why.
I like it.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
And so we were talking about the yoga stuff before. And I mean, you said how you were too cool for school with the yogis. And I was the same way, but in reverse of no, like what you're doing, it's just either A, mobility work with fancy Indian names, and now I know they're demonic names, but whatever, putting that to the side for a second. The other thing was, well, you can do that, sure, but can you do that weighted? It's like a Warrior 3, I'm leaning out. It's a single leg Romanian deadlift. Like I can do that with 250 with ease, 253 single leg deadlift. Okay, let's be clear about that. At the time, I was making fun of them. Right now, probably not. 2 kids and some other time later, still doing my jiu-jitsu, but my lifting game isn't where it used to be. But at the time, I was making fun of yogis for it.
Same. I have a good old lady strength right now, but I probably peaked at like 34. I think when I was 34, because I started with bodybuilding and then I did some CrossFit for a while. And then I switched over to straight powerlifting because I wanted to get really strong. So I did straight powerlifting training for like 3 years. And probably towards the end of that was my best raw strength. But I'd say I'm much more well-rounded now than I was at any of those times where my cardio is pretty good. My strength is pretty good. My mobility is really good. I'm actually more well-rounded than I was when I was trying to do CrossFit, because I was trying to learn a lot of skills. That's the one thing about CrossFit. If you start really young with it and you have good gymnastics background or something, you can probably do really well. But when you're trying to learn it as a 30-year-old and you've never done any of that and you're trying to do like handstand walks and handstand push-ups and stuff like that, the learning curve's pretty steep. And I didn't want to be injured all the time. I ended up getting a lot of injuries. And I know that there's smart ways to not do that, but I was like, I really like the strength part of this anyway. So I did the powerlifting. Now I do a mix. I do more of a low intensity or high intensity, lower volume strength training. And then I start with like my big compound lifts and go hard on those. And then I throw in some smart accessory work. And then cardio, I'll do 1 or 2 harder, longer sessions, and then a lot of walking or some bike riding. And that's been good going into my older years. It's kept me healthy. I don't have a lot of aches and pains. I don't get injured. I can't remember the last time I was like actually injured.
That's good. Well, since we're Orthodox, I want to know, have you ever used a Jacob's ladder?
I have once.
Yeah.
When I was traveling, I found a gym that had one because they're hard to find. And I think I lasted like 20 seconds on that. It's so, I mean, it looks kind of hard, but you look at it and you think, I can do that. And then you get on it and you're like, nope.
Yeah. Our strength and conditioning program at our MMA gym had that. Yeah. I spent a lot of time on that. And so it's now I know that Christ is actually Jacob's ladder, but that one, if you do it long enough, right, you might be going home to him anyway.
Is this the ladder of divine ascent?
To that CrossFit idea. The problem I have with CrossFit, the idea behind it is great. Building that perfect athlete, part gymnast, part sprinter, part strength.
Yes.
I get it. But the problem always was that majority of those boxes were owned by chiropractors and physical therapists. So I think there was a little bit of conflict of interest there. The programming wasn't always the wisest, let's say. If you have the right person, it's just a strength and conditioning program at the end of the day. But what you're outlining sounds great in terms of what you're doing right now.
Yeah, it's done great for me. I had to have a major surgery back in June. I had to have like a major abdominal surgery that for most people, a good 3-month recovery. And I was pretty kick-ass after about 6 weeks.
Sweet.
I got back to training sooner than they expected. I'm pretty much 100% back at this point. They still want me to like avoid direct core work. I'm not doing any heavy deadlifts or anything like that. I'm kind of modifying stuff a little bit to just avoid anything too heavy on my core just yet. Basically, after you have 5 babies, the abdominal muscle separation gets pretty gnarly. At least it did for me. I had big babies and they were straight out front. It was pretty bad and it was causing me issues. I had a couple of hernias, so they had to go in and fix all that. So it's a pretty invasive thing that they had to do, and I recovered pretty fast, and I still kept a lot of my strength and everything. And I was telling my husband, because he's kind of new. He hasn't been lifting that long. He did back when he was young, and then he didn't for years and years because he had a pretty physical job. But now that he's been, full-time streamer, he's like, I gotta exercise. I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna have to learn to love this. And he does. Now he's like, I actually like it. It's actually fun. I'm like, told you. So we work out together, and he's like, dang, I can't believe you're like pushing 45-pound dumbbells above your head like 6 weeks after having a major surgery. That's nuts. This is why I tell people start lifting, stay lifting, because as you get older, you'll appreciate it more and more, because the stuff that takes you out when you're old is usually you get really sick, maybe you get cancer, maybe you fall and have a bad break or something, and then you never can quite recover before something else happens. You know what I mean? And that's, you just see the steady decline.
Spiral. Yep.
And when you've been lifting for this long, for me, it's like, 17, 18 years, your body really remembers, and you've built all those cell nuclei for the muscles and everything. So as soon as you start going back into having a stimulus with your training, your body just jumps right back in. And you have a lot of muscle mass there. So even like I was laying on my back for almost 6 weeks. I had to stay in this beach chair position, and I was like hunched over and all this stuff. So I went from 6 weeks of laying down. For a lot of people, they were like worried about pneumonia, and you have to be worried about blood clots and these sorts of things. But I was able to get up on the day of surgery and just like walk around pretty normally. So it just gives you a lot of insurance health-wise as you get older, so that if you do get sick or you have a big surgery or you have an accident, you've got a lot of insurance in the tank to like be able to recover and bounce back from that stuff. Everybody out there, lift the weight. You get up forever, just do it forever until you die.
That's right. There's your take home for the day. Reject feminism, lift weights.
There you go.
Have babies.
Well, I always say I'm kind of a weird person to be talking about this because I'm not. And I get this accusation. You're not the most feminine woman out there. And you're right, I'm not. But I think it's actually helpful when you grow up as a tomboy on farms with boys. You do learn that even if you're strong for a girl, or even if you're willing to get dirty and stuff, you aren't one of the boys. I can do a lot of stuff with the boys, and I can do a lot of stuff the boys can do, but I know that my untrained husband can just walk over and pick up a barbell that took me 5 years of training to be able to deadlift. You know what I mean? I think it just, the limitations and the differences inherently when you grow up physical with boys doing tomboy stuff. and lifting in the gym with guys and everything. Even the strongest girls who train really well and they're absolute monsters, they're never going to do the 700-pound deadlift. Mass matters. There's physics at play here. You know what I mean? So you
100%.
just know the reality a little better, I think.
Absolutely. John, I'll let you get the last thoughts before we let her start right.
I mean, I love the program you're talking about you're doing. I do something similar. I really enjoy splitting it lower pull, upper push, upper pull, lower push. And I'll do 2 or 3 days a week, offset, high intensity assault bike sprints, stuff like that. I really like to do. If not, kickboxing or some other type of martial art for the more cardio type things. But yeah, I like it. I much prefer to do the more high weight, low rep sort of sets. They tend to be my preference. That's always what I did with my coach when I was fighting, and I just sort of stuck with that. But yeah, I mean, I have a guy, he was telling me about a bunch of stats as far as longevity and older age, and muscle density in the lower extremity is one of the greatest predictors of that. So as Rachel was saying, yeah, go lift, build that muscle now when you're younger and you have the ability to do it. And even if it's not just getting older, like she said, getting injured or sick, your body does remember, and it takes half the time to recover muscle after it's atrophied or you've been laid up for a while than if you never built it to begin with. So do the due diligence, put in the effort now, because you don't know what tomorrow holds.
Yeah. I know there's some women who are just never going to get into being a meathead. I get that. But find something you can do that you like that's strength related. That's where the women always go wrong. They just do cardio. They don't want to lift. And it's like, okay, you don't have to go in the gym like Rachel and put on Megadeth and do deadlifts. You don't have to do that, but do something, at least your body weight, something that's at least requiring you to be able to handle your own body weight and move your body through full ranges of motion to keep your joints and your connective tissue healthy and strong, to keep some muscle on you. You can do a lot with your body weight, actually. I think a lot of us found this out during COVID. You can make body weight real heavy if you do it right. So if you really don't want to lift weights, you just can't get into it, find calisthenics program or a martial arts program or something where you're using your body weight to keep your lean mass on, because especially for women, man, and if you're going to have babies, do some pelvic floor stuff, do like prehab and rehab before and after babies. It's super important. You won't pee your pants every time you sneeze. You won't have, like, a lot of women have things, bladder prolapse or a lot of complications from pregnancies that you can prevent by taking prehab and post baby rehab steps to keep all that stuff strong. But I mean, nothing strengthens that like heavy lifting.
Oh, yeah.
It works great for that.
That was awesome. Now, I definitely appreciate you coming on. I think we covered a lot of different areas that we wanted to talk about. And looking through the outline we had put together, the little notes, we're like, "Wait, we already hit that. We already hit that. We already hit that." So let's leave our listeners with where they can find you. I'm sure most of our listeners probably have an idea where they can find you, but we'd also have some of the yayas and the older crowd who listen to us. So yeah, give it a shot to where we can find Rachel.
Yeah, well, you can find my book on Amazon. If you just type in Occult Feminism, Rachel Wilson, it will come up. Another great place is my Substack. I have some really cool articles and essays on there if you don't want to read a whole book and you don't want to pay for a whole book. By the way, the book is on Audible and it's on Kindle now. And then there's paper books as well. The Substack is rwilson.substack.com if you want to kind of see a little bit of what my writing's about. I do have a little YouTube channel. I haven't streamed on it in a year. As soon as we're done with this cross-country move in a couple weeks, I do plan to do a little more of that. And if you want to see me in person and you want to meet me, I'm going to be doing a debate at DebateCon in Nashville, November 15 and 16. Andrew's got 2 debates. Jim Bob is doing a debate. Jake Rattlesnake has a debate, and I have a debate. So we're also going to have a big Crucible after party Saturday night that everybody who has a ticket is welcome to come and hang out and meet the whole crew. But that's going to be fun. I'm going to debate an atheist fellow on women's liberation. So we'll see how he does. He's insisting he's going to destroy me, so we'll find out.
We would be the first.
He would be the first. That's true.
Right.
Not to toot my own horn, but I'm pretty much undefeated at this point, so we'll see. You know, he's a smart guy and he's coming all the way from the UK.
Wow.
I'm actually hoping he gives me a hard time because a lot of times it ends up being a bit of a steamroll. So I'm hoping, I think he will. I think he'll give me a run for my money and make it hard for me, but I think I'll win out in the end.
I mean, that's kind of the same mindset we all had with going into our fights for John and I, where it's like, yeah, like there's going to be a challenge, but I still expect to win. I don't expect to lose this. So absolutely. We appreciate you.
I just want to thank Rachel for being here. I think this was a phenomenal discussion. As Mike said, we touched on so much subject matter. This is definitely going to be one that I go back and re-listen to a few times. So again, thank you for being here with us. And I look forward to hearing that debate.
Well, thanks for letting me come on and yap. You guys have found out that when you ask Rachel to be on your podcast, you're asking for a lot of chatty lady time, and you just let me go. I'll just talk. So thank you guys for reining me back in a few times and bringing it back around, because I do get going on tangents and can't stop myself. So
That's
thank you
right.
for having me on. It was a great discussion, and I was so happy to be able to talk about the health side of things and working out and all that stuff, because it's actually something I'm super passionate about. It's like the other big thing in my life that I've spent a lot of time on and I really, really love. So it was really cool because nobody's ever asked me to talk about any of this before. So it was really fun.
Absolutely. I made sure when I said I knew that those were areas that you like to talk about. So I was like, no, we're definitely going to incorporate that as the idea behind our show. Like we've done training episodes, we've done fasting episodes, and etc. But then we'd like to tackle these weirder topics too. And you are definitely the top voice on that kind of front. So who can weave all those thoughts together. That was great. So one last time, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a powerful conversation, from exposing the feminist and the occult roots of diet culture and society in general, to reclaiming food, fasting, marriage, and childbirth in Christ, and then hearing about your own journey into strength, lifting, and ancestral health. I think that mix of cultural critique and practical wisdom is exactly what our listeners needed as we close this arc and move forward in our sacred diet arc.
Yeah, Rachel, it's been awesome having you on. You've given us a lot to chew on, pun intended. And more than that, you've reminded us that these things aren't just abstract. They affect how families eat, how women view their bodies, and how we all frame our worldviews.
And now that really wraps up the women's health arc. We started with fertility and motherhood, we moved through cycles, parish life, and real health struggles, and we've ended with the big picture, the spiritual war behind it all. Our hope is that these live episodes have given you not only tools, but also hope that Christ restores and heals every part of our lives, even what's on our plates.
Going forward, we'll be continuing on with our brand new arc we've been looking forward to for a long time, the Sacred Diets arc. Following our discussion from last week on Seventh-day Adventism, we'll be diving even deeper into the myths, movements, and even cults that have shaped how Americans think about food.
That's right. From the Blue Zones and the Healing Springs of Arkansas to Mormonism, Methodism, and the caffeine-free gospel, all the way to veganism and the new Gnostics, we're going to tackle it head-on and show how Orthodoxy reframes the table in Christ.
So, make sure you're subscribed, share this with a friend who needs it, and leave us a review if you've been really enjoying the show. It helps us to spread the word.
Absolutely. We'll see you next week as we step into part 2 of the Sacred Diet arc. Until then, God bless.
Is available on Spotify, Apple Music, and all of your other favorite listening locations. And you can also find us available on YouTube at Dr. Michael Christian, Rumble at Orthodox Health, and Substack at Orthodox Health Podcast. You can also follow us on social media for more insights, discussions, and behind-the-scenes content. Connect with us on Instagram at Orthodox Health or in our Telegram group at Orthodox Health Podcast, and join the conversation. We'd love to hear your thoughts, answer your questions, and continue building this community together. And finally, if you're enjoying the show, leaving a quick review on your favorite podcast platform goes a long way in helping others discover Orthodox health. Until then, stay strong in faith, take care of your temple, and keep Christ at the center of your health journey. God bless.